Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. One of the benefits of living for a while is you get to see how the story ends. It's sometimes a little depressing. If you're over 40, you probably remember Robert Reich. He was Bill Clinton's labor secretary. He was a liberal among moderates in that administration, but a thoughtful and engaging person. His views weren't mainstream, but he certainly wasn't stupid or a hater. Well, that was all before Trump. Like a lot of people in our ruling class, Robert Reich is now a completely different person. Just the other day, Reich wrote that the entire Trump presidency ought to be annulled, not just ended prematurely, that's no longer radical enough, but erased from history, forgotten by decree. America must reset to the first Monday in November 2016, like none of it ever happened. We'd have to retroactively Photoshop an awful lot of pictures. But according to Reich, it's the only remedy. Reality isn't tolerable. It should be banned. Reich was dead serious, apparently. Keep in mind that 20 years ago, people considered him impressive. Some still do, which tells you a lot about the state of our intellectual leaders. People still defend John Brennan, too, even after he revealed on television that there's something seriously wrong with him. Officials who run the CIA ought to be sober and reasonable and even-tempered. It's too powerful a job with too little oversight and too little accountability for a wacko. That would be dangerous for the country. And yet over the weekend, there was Brennan once again charging a political opponent with a death penalty offense on the basis of zero evidence. Watch.
I've been having a hell of a time here on this show trying to get my guests to say the word treason. I think the president is guilty of that, and you used terms like that. You said after Helsinki it was nothing short of treasonous, which sounds to me like treasonous.
Treasonous is defined as a betrayal of trust as well as aiding and abetting the enemy. And so that was the word that came to my mind.
Things are accelerating fast. Trump as a racist became Trump as a traitor, which has now become Trump as a non-person who must be erased from our collective memory. The left is officially out of epithets. All that's left is physical harm. Who will be the first to call for that? It feels inevitable at this point. Mark Stein is an author and columnist, and he joins us tonight. So what do you make of annulling the Trump presidency, Mark?
Well, I think this is rather like the famous episode of Dallas, where after they wrote off an entire season as not having gone anywhere, and Pam Ewing stepped into the shower, and there was Bobby Ewing, who was supposed to be dead, restored to life. And Robert Reich seems to basically be proposing the same solution here, that Robert Reich will step into the shower, and there will be President Hillary Clinton magnificently. I hope that's not a bit too vivid for you. Actually, as I was halfway through that image, it suddenly got a bit too
pretty
vivid for me. But that does actually reflect the level of denial here. If you recall, going back to November 2016, we heard all this stuff about, America is unique in having the peaceful transfer of power, which I don't quite accept. I mean, generally speaking, when they get a new prime minister in Denmark, they don't throw the old one off the Parliament building or anything. There are other countries that have peaceful transfers of power.
Yes,
what's interesting here is that actually they can't accept that, and the denialism, which back a year and a half ago was just like with fake Newsweek covers showing the rightful president, is now extending to former cabinet secretaries actually arguing for the erasure of the historical record. And sort of resetting things to year zero. And actually that is harmful to the so-called peaceful transfer of power, and in that sense Reich should be ashamed of himself.
So, but that's kind of the key. Here you have not just some pundit on MSCNN or whatever, but here you have a former cabinet secretary and a well-regarded one. I mean, I know him, and he is a legitimately smart guy. And then a former CIA director who's not a legitimately smart guy, but still a former CIA director. I mean, these are the pillars of the establishment. What is it, macro question, about Trump that drives the ruling class to say things like this, irrational things, crazy things?
Well, I think there is a general presumption that it's not just that he won, but that he shouldn't have won. And therefore, because he shouldn't have won, he cannot really have won. And that's why you have to have this, basically this dance of speculation. Now, the treason accusation, I think, is actually, for a start, treason is giving aid and comfort to the enemy, and actually Russia isn't the enemy at the moment. In fact, it was President Obama who mocked the very idea that Russia was even a sort of geopolitical rival of any kind. So we're not at war with Russia. The idea that that is actually possible of rising to the level of treason is faintly absurd. But I think it's the need to delegitimize, and you know, a couple of cycles ago that just meant mocking the other guy as being stupid and being unworthy of it and all the rest of it. But it's actually gone on to something far more dangerous, which is actually delegitimizing the entire system. When you have major political figures saying that, in effect, the peaceful transfer of power is not possible, it can't possibly happen, therefore if it does happen, it's illegitimate, it's not so much this or that president that they're delegitimizing, but actually the very possibility of civilized self-government by free
exactly.
people.
So if the supposed adults on the left, Reich and Brennan and many others, are talking themselves into this frenzy where each round becomes more extreme than the last, how long before someone convinces himself that, you know, we need to storm the White House, we need to take action, like physical action here? That's the terminus of this, right? How could it not be?
Well, that's what makes this at a certain level ridiculous. I mean, for Bill Maher, just before that bit with Brennan, said that this was the third biggest crisis in America's history. The Revolutionary War, and then the Civil War, and now this. Well, what are you doing about it, Bill? You're having another decaf macchiato and finding another Canadian singer-songwriter to date. You're not pledging your life, your fortune, and your sacred honor, are you? By the way, speaking of treason, if he is dating another Canadian singer-songwriter, that's like George Washington dating a United Empire loyalist at the time of the Revolutionary War. So he's not even serious about what he's saying, and that's what makes it decadent. If either this is, as Bill Maher says, the third great crisis in American history, or it's just something you guys are talking about over your Sauvignon Blanc for a giggle. But exactly. if they're not serious about it, they shouldn't be saying it, because somebody will take it seriously, and that's the real danger.
Meanwhile, the middle class dies, and nobody cares. Mark Stein, thank you very much for that. Great to see you.
Thanks a lot, Tucker.
So is it legal, is it even possible to annul a presidency? Julian Epstein is a Democrat and former counsel to the House Judiciary Committee. He joins us now. So, Julian, I have noticed that the left has become more than anything a religious movement, and the use of the term annulment kind of proves it. If the presidency were annulled, as Reich suggests, would heretics who persist on acknowledging that Trump was once president, would they be punished?
It's a funny way to put the question. I don't think annulment is a serious argument. I don't think we're at the threshold of impeachment yet. I think there is a tendency going on with Democrats right now, as there was during the '98 Clinton impeachment, for people in the opposition party to scream loud,
yes,
and to try to get an attention, and to scream kind of louder than the other, because it helps with clicks on websites and it helps get them on television. But I don't think it's a serious argument.
But it's a different. So you and I had many debates during impeachment.
98,
so long we've known each other. And there were people who were claiming that Bill Clinton murdered someone at Mina Airport.
Precisely.
And, you know, there was a lot of that stuff.
Precisely.
But it wasn't coming.
Vince Foster.
For sure. But it wasn't coming from former cabinet secretaries.
Dan Burton.
Okay, you had a member of Congress who had all kinds of theories, but he was embarrassed of those theories. And when confronted with them, he's like, oh, I didn't really think that. Here you have pillars of the Democratic establishment saying on television things that are so far out and extreme, I'm not even sure how to respond to them. Does that make you uncomfortable?
I don't know if he's a pillar of the Democratic establishment. I think he was a labor secretary under Clinton, and I think he's a very good economist. I think he's a sharp thinker as an economist. He is not a lawyer, and I don't think he's a legal scholar, and I think he'd probably do better staying away from that. I think there were plenty of Republican members of Congress that said very extremist things during Clinton impeachment. So I think it happens on both sides. It's a natural thing that occurs.
I don't think anybody accused Bill Clinton of treason. So here you have
people accuse Bill Clinton of murder.
Of but not in public. I mean, they sort of whispered about it, but you didn't have, for example, a former head of the CIA. Does it bother you, actually, that John Brennan, who was complimented by Republicans, by the way, when he first got in, I'll concede that, but he was the head of the CIA, and now he's accusing a political opponent of a death penalty offense with no evidence. Does it bother you that he ran the most powerful intelligence agency in the world?
Well, I think what Brennan was referring to, and people use treason in different ways. People sometimes use treason in a legal sense, and sometimes people use treason in a more vernacular sense. And I think what Brennan was talking about was Trump continually cozying with Putin, who I think most Republicans would agree is an enemy of the United States. And certainly an opponent of the United States.
I don't know if I would agree with that. I mean, he's certainly no more bloodthirsty than lots of Middle Eastern tyrants.
I think if you look at what he's done with the airliners, I think if you he's done in Crimea and Syria, I don't think he's a guy that's looking out for U.S. interests.
No, of course he's not looking out for U.S. interests. I think he would undermine U.S. interests. So would a lot of countries.
That was the point. But look, I think you can go back and forth. We could go back, as we did in '98, and you go back. You can find extremists on both sides who will say things that, again, I think are designed to get attention, get on television, get clickbait for the things.
Sure, but then you also, and what you're saying is absolutely right, but you also have people like, I don't know, the ranking Democrat on the House Intel Committee, who on this show accused me of carrying water for Putin because I had sincere questions about the evidence of collusion. So you do have a kind of different level of extremism, I would argue, but it leads to this question, which is, if Trump is guilty of these crimes that virtually everyone on the left alleges, then why aren't we just saying out loud, there's an impeachment coming? Why are Democrats ashamed of that?
As to the question of extremism, there's a lot of extremism going on both sides. And I hope, as a thoughtful guy that you are, that you would denounce it, the extremism that's occurring on the right. I denounce the extremism that's occurring on the left. I think the Robert Reich article was ridiculous. That's the first point. The second point is not everybody on the left is saying Trump is guilty of crimes. I don't think there's proof yet that Trump is guilty of crimes. I think the question on campaign finance, as we were discussing before we came on air, I don't think that reaches an impeachable offense, and I think it's questionable as whether it reaches a legal offense because of the ambiguity of campaign finance laws. We can talk about that more.
No, well, of course I agree.
I think
completely.
The question on collusion rests entirely on whether Trump had advanced knowledge of any illegal activity that was connected to Russian hacking. That has not been proven yet. So this Democrat is not alleging a crime as it involves Donald Trump.
But you know as well as I that the pressure, and the polls bear this out, the pressure from Democratic voters to impeach if Democrats retake the House will be so overwhelming that what speaker could look at the people who just put him or her in that position and say, you know, we're not impeaching?
Well, what I was going to say, one of the reasons that I think there's so much pressure around these investigations is how badly the Trump White House has handled the Russian investigation matter. It looks at every turn that they are trying to cover up crimes, whether it is the firing, the threatened firings, the promises of pardons, all of the flipping of the witness. The accountant has flipped on the president. His attorney has flipped on the president. Campaign manager. The poor way, and Giuliani
is looking guilty the same as being guilty?
No, it's not. Not in a legal.
Okay.
No, Tucker. Not in a legal world, but in a political way. You know as well as I do that the actions of this White House have looked guilty from the beginning. Has made them look guilty. It doesn't mean that they're guilty in a legal sense, but it has been handled horribly. Okay. Now, if the Democrats, where the Democrats ought to be, and what I would argue, and I've spoken to Democrats on the Hill, is they should not be coming to legal conclusions or conclusions about impeachment at this point.
But can they resist
what
impeachment?
They should be,
can they, their voters want it?
Smart. Well, this is the problem with the polarized politics as we play to the extreme bases. And Republicans do this, I think, I would argue, more so than Democrats do. But we can disagree about that.
I don't see that at all.
We can disagree about that. But if Democrats were smart, they would tell the base that we're not going to kind of kowtow to the impulses that may make you feel better emotionally. We're going to do what you and I would probably agree ought to be done here. Listen to the point.
If you can find one Democratic leader, look, I agree with you. Of course,
it's the Democratic leadership.
If you can find one Democratic leader with the huevos to say something like that on television, I'll give you $20.
Well, I think that's basically what the Democrats are saying in other words. And what the Democrats ought to be saying, Tucker, is
we're almost at time.
We're not going to make conclusions about impeachment. We're not going to make conclusions about prosecution. We want facts to come out. We want to protect the independent counsel and all the other investigations that are underway. We should protect the integrity of the investigation.
Then they should tell the treason
and allow
chorus
the facts
to shut up.
allow the facts to come out.
All right.
And you ought to be there, and I ought to be there, and we ought to say, let's make a decision.
I've been saying that since day one. I'm just totally. It's been 2 years. years
But
now.
are you for the Republican plan, the Senate bipartisan Republican plan that protects the
I'm for running the
special
government
counsel?
and like rescuing the middle class from oblivion.
Well, what
That was
about
the whole point
what
of
about the
this.
Grassley bill that would protect the special counsel?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think we should have any special counsels of any kind. It's unaccountable to the voters.
But now that
We
there's an
have
investigation,
mechanisms.
do you think the
I
integrity
just
of
want
that
it to go
investigation-
away and think about why. No, I'm serious. And think about why 70,000 people died of drug ODs last year. There's like real stuff going on.
But you just said that you think the integrity of the investigation ought to be
All right.
protected. with
I think
all the
I
facts
asked.
on
Look,
the table.
it's just the whole thing is so stupid. I've run out of patience for it. But that's not why I asked you to come on tonight, Julian. Thank you very much.